There was a moment in the early 2000s when arcade racing games were everywhere. You had futuristic anti-gravity racers, hyper-realistic simulators, street racing games that were drenched in neon, and then you had some weirder ones. The ones where realism was thrown completely out of the window. The kind where cars could fire, tornadoes, flip through the air, and boost across tracks at speeds that probably violated several laws of physics. And sitting right in the middle of that chaos was a game called Rumble Racing, released in 2001 exclusively for the PS2. Developed by EA and built as a kind of spiritual successor to NASCAR Rumble, which by the way I'm really sorry I haven't played, Rumble Racing took the basic idea of chaotic arcade racing and pushed it even further into absurd territory. Gone was the NASCAR license and the restraints of real-world vehicles. Instead, EA leaned fully into creativity, building a game that felt like someone mashed together Mario Kart, Hot Wheels toys, and also a completely over-the-top stunt show, and then cranked that speed dial way up. But here's the question. Nearly 25 years later, does Rumble Racing still hold up? So today we're going to go back into this PS2 era to find out why this game became such a cult favourite, and why even today it feels surprisingly unique. My name is Kledge, and together let's dive in to Rumble Racing. So before we talk about the actual gameplay itself, it's worth remembering the time this game released. The early PS2 era was packed with racing games, and most of them leaned more toward realism. You had Gran Turismo, which was dominating the simulation side, games like Ridge Racer were keeping the traditional arcade alive, and futuristic racers were still riding the popularity wave of games like Wipeout. But Rumble Racing, wasn't trying to compete with any of those. Instead, it leaned into this pure arcade insanity. Cars in the game aren't really based on real vehicles. They're exaggerated, cartoonish muscle cars, sport cars, hot rods, with ridiculous proportions, some bright colours, oversized engines, and designs that look like they kinda came out of a toy box. And that design philosophy carries over to the rest of the game. Tracks twist through deserts, jungles, mountains, cities. There are massive jumps, lots and lots of hidden shortcuts, stunt ramps, and hazards. Power-ups can send you flying or spinning out the way, and on top of that, the game adds something that many arcade racers didn't have at the time. A full trick system, which ends up being one of the most important mechanics in the entire game. So if there's one thing that Rumble Racing absolutely nails, it's speed. The game moves very fast. Even in the early rookie class races, you're already flying around tracks at a fairly high pace that makes some traditional racing games feel kind of slow by comparison. And once you unlock the later car classes, especially the elite tier, the speed becomes pretty much absurd. We're talking about a level of velocity that feels, closer to futuristic racers than traditional car games. But the real twist comes from how the game encourages you to drive. Unlike most racing games where the goal is simply to take clean racing lines and avoid mistakes, Rumble Racing actively wants you to launch your car into the air as often as possible, because when you're airborne you can perform tricks. So the trick system is simple, but it's incredibly effective. Whenever you hit a jump or a ramp, you can perform aerial tricks by holding the analog stick in different directions to flip or do a barrel roll, and then you just have to make sure you're lined up to land. And when you do land successfully, you earn a speed boost, and the more complex the trick, the bigger the boost, and that mechanic completely changes how you approach races. Instead of avoiding jumps to keep your car stable, you're actively seeking them out. Big ramps, shortcut routes, and weird track layouts, anything that can launch you into the air becomes an opportunity for a boost. It turns the entire game into a kind of stunt-based racing system, and you can stack those boosts up to last even longer if you keep finding jumps and pulling off more tricks. And it works really well. Early on, you can just get away with hitting a couple of jumps, landing a few tricks here and there, But as the game gets harder, the boost from more complex and repeated stunts becomes almost essential to winning the race. If you're not performing tricks consistently in the later races, you're not getting the speed that you need to win. It's a mechanic that, to me, feels surprisingly modern. A lot of later arcade racers would experiment with some similar ideas, but Rumble Racing implemented it in a very clean, intuitive way, which still impresses even now, 25 years later. Now, before we continue further into our look at Rumble Racing, if you're a fan of retro racing games and throwbacks, then please consider hitting that subscribe button and tapping that bell to stay up to date with anything else I upload in the future. Anyway, let's move on to the power-ups, because of course, this would not be an arcade racer without power-ups. And Rumble Racing absolutely embraces that. Throughout races, you'll collect items that let you attack other races or disrupt the pack. Some are simple projectile attacks and others create hazards on the track. But one of my personal favourites has to be this pickup where you get a small boost and then this red kind of shield thing on the front of your car, and the minute you hit into anyone else, they just get fucking launched into the atmosphere. It happened to me on one of my first races and I just could not stop laughing because my car just got demolished and launched into the atmosphere.
How do you expect to win pulling stunts like that?
The balance of items in the game seems to be pretty good. Players hanging near the back of the pack still get better items, which is a classic arcade racing design choice, but it's not ridiculously unfair and pure chaos. You can't just hang back and expect a miracle item to win the entire race for you. If you want to win consistently, you still have to actually drive well. So another area where Rumble Racing really shines is its track design. Every track is packed with shortcuts, and these aren't just simple side paths. Many of them have multiple layers, alternate routes, and different risk-reward decisions. Some shortcuts are faster but harder to execute, and others require jumps or tricky maneuvers that mean you have to have boost to reach. Sometimes you'll take a shortcut only to realise you missed an even better one, which means learning the tracks becomes incredibly important. As you play through the championships, you gradually start memorising where the best routes are, where the biggest jumps are, and where the hidden paths are in fact located. And once you start chaining shortcuts together with trick boosts, races become incredibly satisfying. It's one of those games where your performance will improve dramatically as you learn the layouts of the tracks. So the single player mode is pretty much structured around championships and different car classes. You start with the rookie class, which is using slower vehicles. As you win tournaments and progress through the game, you unlock better cars and eventually move into higher classes like Pro and Elite, and each class dramatically increases the speed of the game. By the time you reach the Elite tier, the game becomes ridiculous in the best possible way. Cars are moving so fast that the tracks you once knew very well suddenly feel very different. Corners that used to be manageable become high-speed danger zones, and jumps become opportunities for massive trick boost chains, and it keeps the game feeling fresh even many races in. The constant unlocking of new vehicles and tracks gives the game a strong sense of progression. However, there was one car that I unlocked quite early into the game called Dragon, and it had this really creepy smile that reminded me of the Cheshire Cat, and honestly, it did kind of give me nightmares. Anyway, there's always another car to earn, another tournament to complete, and another track to master, and that's what I love so much about this game. The game also has multiplayer, but unfortunately because I'm quite lonely, I didn't really have any way to test this, and I didn't really want to just sit there with two controllers and play by myself. So it supports 2-player split-screen racing, and supposedly includes both competitive and co-op options. And the co-op mode sounds pretty interesting. Instead of racing against each other, you and a friend can enter tournaments together as a team, and work through the same progression system used in single player. And that sounds like a really cool way to play the game. Unfortunately, there's one big thing missing here, and that's 4-player split screen, but for someone like me who can't even find someone for 2 players, I'm not really going to cry about not being able to find anyone for 4. Given how chaotic the game already is, 4 players battling with power-ups and trick boosts could have been incredible. but even with just 2 players, I can imagine this game would be a great couch multiplayer experience. Now, I want to talk about one of the more controversial aspects of the game, the AI. For the most part, the difficulty curve is relatively solid. Early races ease you into the mechanics, the rookie tournaments are forgiving enough to let players learn the trick system and get comfortable with the tracks. But once you reach the mid-game, the AI starts getting very aggressive. Like, insanely aggressive. CPU opponents will bump you, slam into you, launch you into the air, knock you off course, and generally just try and make your life miserable. And sometimes it can feel a little bit unfair. And one of the biggest frustrations comes from how collisions work. If another racer hits you from behind, it can send your car spinning or flying, and occasionally you'll land only to be immediately hit again by another car, which can quickly turn a first place lead into a last place disaster. It's the kind of chaos that fits the arcade style of the game, but it definitely can be frustrating in certain moments. Still, it's not game-breaking by any sense of the imagination, it's just something that you'll probably notice during longer play sessions.
The trick is to stick it.
Now, from a technical perspective, Rumble Racing does something very impressive for a PS2 game. It runs at 60 FPS, and not just in single player, because having looked at footage and read reviews at the time, the split-screen multiplayer, even with multiple cars and explosions and whatnot, keeps the smooth frame rate almost perfectly. And that's incredibly important for a game this fast. If the frame rate dipped or stuttered, the entire experience would suffer. But Rumble Racing keeps things fluid and responsive. Visually, the game is a bit more mixed. The vehicle designs themselves are fantastic, they're creative, they're mostly colourful, and they all have a distinct personality. But the technical detail of the car models isn't quite pushing the PS2 hardware to its limits. Some textures are fairly simple, and the models aren't as detailed as what other PS2 racing games would eventually achieve. The track environments are similar. Some areas look great, especially the trees and special effects, while others just feel a bit plain, but honestly, the sheer speed and chaos and fun of the game makes most of these issues very, very easy to overlook. When you're flying across a track at ridiculous speeds, well, you're not exactly stopping to admire the texture resolution anyway, so really, who cares? Now, in terms of the sound design, I would say it's pretty solid overall. The crash effects are satisfying, engine noises are mostly powerful, and impacts and collisions feel appropriately chaotic.
I am now bathed in a glorious light.
The only minor downside to me is that the engine sounds aren't dramatically different from car to car, but since this isn't exactly a simulation racer, it's not really a huge problem. And then there's the music. The soundtrack leans heavily into a kind of country rock southern style sound that fits the exaggerated hot rod aesthetic of the game. Whether you actually enjoy the music is obviously going to be subjective. Some of you may love it, and some of you might just turn the music off. Fortunately, the game lets you adjust the audio mix, so you can easily turn the music down and just let the sound effects take center stage. There's also a race commentator who chimes in during races. Thankfully, the frequency and tone are kind of restrained compared to some other arcade racers of the era. He adds a bit of flavour without becoming too annoying, but you probably will start to hear phrases repeated after, well, not too long playing. So how did the game fare in terms of its review scores and sales at the time? So, as I mentioned, this launched back in 2001, and review scores were incredibly positive. The game currently holds a Metacritic score of 85 out of 100, with high scores as high as 100 from certain critics. The game wasn't exactly EA's best seller, but it sold a modest 200,000 units, and those figures are from VG charts. Looking back today, what really makes Rumble Racing interesting is how unique it still feels. Modern racing games rarely combine all of these elements, arcade racing, trick-based gameplay, destructive power-ups, and extremely high speeds. Usually games focus on one or two of those ideas. Rumble Racing just goes f*** it and throws them all together, and somehow it works really well. The trick system encourages skillful driving, the shortcuts reward track knowledge, the power-ups create chaotic moments, and the constant unlocking of cars and tracks keeps the game engaging. And also, when you're barrel rolling over the top of other drivers, it just looks cool as f***. It's the kind of game that was very clearly designed with just pure fun in mind. So, more than 20 years later, Rumble Racing still holds up surprisingly well. It's not perfect, the AI can occasionally feel very aggressive, the graphics aren't the most technically impressive PS2 game ever, and the soundtrack might not be to everyone's taste, but the core gameplay remains absolutely fantastic. The racing is insanely fast, the trick system is fantastic, the track design is clever and full of lots of secret shortcuts, and the sheer number of unlockables gives the game a lot of replay value. And most importantly, above all else, it's just a lot of fun. In fact, you could easily argue that Rumble Racing is one of the best pure arcade racers ever released on the PS2. And strangely, it's also a type of racing game we don't see very often anymore, which makes revisiting it today feel that much more special. Anyway, what do you guys think of Rumble Racing? Share all your thoughts in the comments down below. And if there's an old game you want to see covered on this channel, racing game, or even not racing game, then share it in the comments as well, because I'll always happily take suggestions because I just love playing old games. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, please consider hitting that subscribe button. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thank you and goodbye.